Hi, everybody. This is Bill Young from Berlin Center United Methodist Church. This is the Gospel of John study. It is June 27th, and this is day one of week 6. Do not worry if you're just tuning in. You do not have to have watched the videos from weeks 1 through 5. You can join this study at any time. Today, we're going to just look at John chapter 11, verses 1 through 16. So let's begin. So starting at verse 1, it says, "Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sister sent word to Jesus, 'Lord, the one you love is sick.' When he heard this, Jesus said, 'This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it.' Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was for 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, 'Let's go back to Judea.' 'But Rabbi,' they said, 'a short while ago the Jews there tried to stone you, and yet you are going back?' Jesus answered, 'Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by the world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light.' After he said this, he went on to tell them, 'Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to wake him up.' His disciples replied, 'Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better.' Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, 'Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I am glad I was not there, so you may believe. But let us go to him.' Then Thomas, also known as Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, 'Let us also go, that we may die with him.'" So now I'm going to read from page 76 and 77 in the book about this passage. It says, "Understanding the Word." This story begins with introducing us to Lazarus for the first time. It is very interesting indeed that the evangelist identifies Lazarus' sister by means of a story he was not going to tell until later in John 12. We must remember that these stories were oral traditions passed along for a long period of time before they found their ways into written source. And so the evangelist is simply reminding his audience which Mary he was referring to in this case. We are in fact told in verse 5 that Jesus loved this whole Judean family, and precisely because of his behavior upon hearing the news seems exceedingly odd. It appears that Jesus is going to wait to go to Bethany until the man has died. Lest we see this as an example of Jesus' lacking compassion, we must bear in mind that Jesus can raise the dead, and that throughout his gospel, Jesus has to wait for the go-ahead from the Father before doing things, and that is probably the case here. Was Jesus a false prophet when he said, "This sickness will not end in death," and then Lazarus went on to die? As it turns out, the answer is no. Jesus will go on to speak of Lazarus' death using the euphemism of sleep, which was not uncommon in early Judaism, as a way of referring to the dead. The term was used by those who believed in the resurrection, believing that death was no permanent than sleep, something that one could come back from alive by means of resurrection. Jesus is not suggesting that death is like sleep in its nature. He doesn't believe we will be snoozing in the afterlife. He is suggesting only that the condition is temporary, and that God will use the death of Lazarus as an occasion for Jesus' glory to shine forth. Thus, it is that Jesus waits 2 more days, and then says to his disciples, Let us go back to Judea. The disciples, nervous Nellies that they are often, counsel against this move in light of the previous attempt to stone Jesus there. Jesus' response to this warning is cryptic, but the gist of what he is saying is that he must do the will of the Father, the work of the ministry, while it is still day, while there is still time to get some things accomplished. Jesus knows he is on the clock, and it is ticking, and night is coming when no work can be done. John 9, verse 4. So he needs to get on with it, especially when it involves some of his own loved ones. The exchange between Jesus and the disciples make us wonder who was really asleep during this whole process. The disciples fail to understand that Jesus means Lazarus is dead and he is going to remedy the situation. Jesus has to spell it out for them. Notice that Jesus calls Lazarus our friend, assuming perhaps the disciples have a prior relationship with him as well. This section closes with a revealing look at Thomas, the twin. But the twin of whom? Who is fatalistic sounding suggestion says, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." Here Thomas seems to be depicted as Mr. Doom and Gloom. Later in John 20, he is depicted not merely as doubting Thomas, but as lacking faith, as we shall see. So now let's take a look at the questions. And here to read today's questions is my special assistant, Jenna.
Question 1. What strikes you as odd about the beginning of this story that climaxes the first half of this gospel? Question 2. What is the
significance
of the phrase "the one you love" in 11:3 in light of
subsequent references
to the disciple whom Jesus loved? Question 3. How can God use a loved one's death for displaying his glory?
Well, these are some good questions to think about and look back on the scripture we just read. And tomorrow we will tune in again and look at John chapter 11, verses 17 through 27. Until tomorrow, have a great day.